Listening to 100 Words or Less with Ray Harkins. Hello one, hello all. Welcome to this Christmas holiday episode. And we're doing something a little different. It's just me solo here doing a mailbag episode. That's obviously what like almost every single podcast does during the holiday season because, you know, trying to schedule guests and all that stuff is difficult. And sometimes you can record these in advance. I am not. I am literally recording it the day before Christmas, Christmas Eve, which is the day that the episode is going to be coming out. But without getting too sentimental, I really appreciate you listening and consuming this podcast. Full stop. It's been one of the most rewarding things that I've done in my life creatively and also building a community, not just around the show, but just independent music in general. I think it's a very meaningful thing, not only for me, the guests that come on the show, everybody that I've ever interacted with over the past, 10 plus years of this podcast. They have either grown up with it, found value in it, kept them connected to independent music. All of that is not lost on me, and I really genuinely appreciate this. I hope that you hear that sincerity, and if I could just pour my heart out, I know I'm a very heart on your sleeve person in general, but I really appreciate that. And if you're listening to this, thank you. Thank you very much. So let's dive in to we'll try to tackle these in somewhat, not chronological, but somewhat cohesive order. There were some very specific questions in regards to like, hey, when is Taken going to play again? And stuff that I'm like, you know what, that's not the time or the place for this particular podcast. But I wanted to start off with the most popular episodes from this year. And granted, as you can probably imagine, most of the popular episodes were released in like the first couple of months of the year because obviously it gave the entire year to rack up download streams, whatever you want to call it. But I just think it's interesting because not only do I find like someone who might be predicted as a highly trafficked guest sometimes isn't. And then vice versa, where the ones that are deeper cuts, tend to rise to the top. And by no means am I doing this for the downloads or the clicks or whatever. If I wanted that, truthfully, I would be doing a lot more in regards to marketing and, putting videos out and all that sort of stuff. I want for the people to find this in a very organic method. And but anyways, the reason I say that is because these numbers or these people are not like the most popular people within independent music. I'm not doing that. But with that huge preamble out of the way, here's the most popular episodes from this year. Brenden Murphy from Counterparts back in January of 2025. I mean, Brenden has been on the show a couple of times, and no matter where he appears from a press perspective, he's always honest, insightful, thoughtful, hilarious, also completely unhinged, is down to answer ridiculous questions. If I'm not mistaken, we actually got pretty in-depth in regards to how, Zen functions, how vaping, how he's able to handle that on plane flights, all this other stuff. So it was a fun conversation, and I understand that why that was the most popular episode of this past year. Number 2 is the live chat I did with Dwid and Aaron Melnick from Integrity. I released that in January of 2025. But I had that discussion at New England Metal and Hardcore Festival, like September, October the previous year. I was really nervous because not only was it a pretty unconventional environment in which we were recording, I was like literally behind the Kill Switch Engage like art exhibit that they had there. It was just like a little quiet corner. And I love going to this festival and interviewing people, but sometimes it's very run and gun, but they were sharing one mic between the both of them. And like I said, very run and gun, shoot from the hip. But it was such a great discussion because it was fun to watch them interact with one another. Because, I mean, truthfully, the last time that they've probably done an interview together was, I mean, I have no clue, but it just doesn't seem like a regular occurrence for them. I had built a relationship with Aaron Melnick because I had him on the podcast for a solo project, Nuclei, I think that's how you say it. Incredible record, by the way, if you haven't listened to that. But it was such a fun conversation, and hearing the earnestness in which Dwid approaches how he handles Integrity's business and musical output. He's just like, we just do what we want. And it's refreshingly honest and simple, but sometimes, especially these legacy acts where it's like you feel the calculations of like, oh, I see why you're doing this. I see why this is happening. And even though, he, Dwid, and all of the other people who are affiliated with Integrity are clearly doing this because obviously there's either renewed interest in 90s hardcore and the lore of Integrity goes back very deep. They really do what they want. It's really, really cool to see. So anyways, that was number 2 episode. Number 3, this one I was kind of surprised because first of all, this is a repeat guest. So I had George Hirsch from Blacklisted and his project / band Staticlone, which is why I had him on the show this year. That episode came out in March of 2025. George, I interviewed him, probably like 6-7 years ago on the podcast. And like for those of you that follow along, I don't tend to have people on the show more than once because truthfully, I don't really want to kind of rehash the same stuff or like just little tweaks on it. I want enough space to live where they might have different opinions or might share different insights. And obviously when I'm doing these interviews, I'm trying to paint the picture of the person, like where they came from, why they got into this music, and why they still care about it. And sometimes the person is young. Not saying George was young when I had him on, but obviously 6 or 7 years younger. But anyways, all of that to say, George was just in a really great headspace to be sharing his thoughts, opinions on, modern hardcore and where Blacklisted sits, why he still feels compelled to create new music and create new bands, all this stuff. So that was a really fun episode. And I just really enjoy George and his company. The 4th best episode from a performance perspective of the year was the Rest of the Best episode that I did with Brian Audley from Incendiary, the guitarist. We basically came up with the idea where it's like, hey, there's records that fall outside of our like normal top 10 stuff, which is so, I just love the fact that I guess people always love lists, but the fact that this format, as it were, people sharing their top 10s or top 5s or whatever, like that just, continues to be a thing. And that makes me happy. So anyways, Brian and I have been friends for many years, and he has always espoused the love of the year-end episode that myself, Jeremy Boehm, and Joey Cahill do. And he was like, man, I love those lists. It helps direct my own musical curiosity and all that sort of stuff. So anyways, I'm like, Brian, how about we do an episode together where we talk about stuff that just fell outside of that, but is still really worth your while to pay attention to? And we did that. I put together a playlist, and it was really, really fun. And Brian, truthfully, he clued me into what is my favorite record of this past year, 2025, in Hotline TNT. I just never really cared about that band or really paid that much attention to them. And now they're released one of my favorite records this past year. So I learn, and hopefully you learn as well. And hopefully Brian does. Everybody learns. So that was released back in January of 2025. And the rounding out the top 5, because I just, top 5, why not? That feels good, is Josh James, the guitarist of Stick to Your Guns. He also played in Evergreen Terrace, played in 18 Visions, played in Davey Havok's straight edge band. I always want to say Exhibit, but it's not, and it's totally escaping my brain right now. I'm not going to Google it because, just don't need to rely on that. But anyways, Josh, I've known, like we've been around each other, but really didn't get to know each other until this particular episode. And he was great. Talk about a dude that's always down for adventure and putting himself in uncomfortable situations. We talked a lot about, him getting arrested overseas and just a lot of his unconventional approaches in regards to the way that he kind of takes care of life in general. And it was a great episode. And I think it really summarizes how people can express themselves on this particular show, where it's like, yes, we're talking about, all of the sort of typical beats that I hit on, but then we went into a lot of different directions with Josh. And yeah, it heartens me that people feel open enough to be able to express themselves in a way that isn't like clickbaity, So anyways, those are the top 5 episodes. And then I also wanted to highlight like newer bands as well, like some episodes that really performed, better than maybe I had thought or anticipated based around just like the, I guess, newness of certain bands. 'Cause sometimes and this kind of dovetails into a question I'll sort of answer a little bit later, but how do you decide on the guests that you have on? And I'll put a pin in that, but that is a question that I will address in a moment. But anyways, the new bands that made this list, I'm just going to list 4, and you'll probably understand why. But I had Akil Godsey from End It. And my gosh, this dude, he's, I know people have used like, force in nature, and like he really says what he means, and he does a lot of front facing videos. Now, I don't know why I'm talking in this voice for just the simple fact that he does a lot of opining into a camera on his social medias. But Akil was great, and his clear-eyed opinions on where his band sits, the fact that he's really riding the wave and just being like, yeah, man, we'll play wherever, whoever, but we're all adults. Like, there's many times where it's like, are we going to go out for, a 60 date tour? Like, probably not, but are we going to do these other things? Yeah, absolutely. And it was just on a lot of people's radars in general, I know. I mean, the fact that they opened up for Blink just shows how far reaching hardcore has obviously become, because I can't imagine that many people attending a Blink concert would have any conceit for what they were seeing when End It went up there. It's like, whoa, what is this dude yelling at me for? Anyways, that was the most popular episode as far as quote unquote new bands. Graham from Homefront, which is a recent guest on the show, his episode performed incredibly well. And I was heartened to see that, because I think some people don't really know what to do with Homefront as far as like categorization, or, like, are they punk? Are they hardcore? It's like, are they oi? I mean, who cares? Obviously, at the end of the day, those are just easy ways for us to describe bands. But yeah, Graham's interview was very insightful. The fact that this band exists, on the crust of the music industry sandwich, where they're like, yeah, we're taking nibbles at the sides, but like, we're not really gonna, go towards the middle as far as like quitting our jobs and like, doing that whole thing. And it was really insightful of Graham to share all of that, perspective on where he sits with his musical output, where the band sits, all that sort of stuff. So it was really heartening to see that episode performed as well as it did. I had Patrick from Restraining Order on, and I'll be honest, like, the conversation was good. It wasn't necessarily something that I thought was like, oh my gosh, like, this was really insightful. I don't think I've ever heard or read Patrick express himself this way, but it was a very popular episode. And I think this Restraining Order record kind of went under a lot of people's radars. I don't think it got the attention or love that's, might have been anticipated maybe a year and a half ago. It doesn't mean that people are not interested, but I just think the general vibe from my perspective was that. But it was cool to see Patrick's episode do so well. And then finally, a non-hardcore entry, Esden from Saturdays at Your Place. I love this band, and Esden was such I really felt like I was sitting with him at his like coffee table, just chopping it up. Even though he was in Michigan, I was in California. Did that interview obviously remotely, like I do many of these, but it was such a great conversation. And for a band that is, DIY and doing their own stuff in regards to releasing records, recording, and then also, playing to a lot of people as they're going on tours. So it was cool to see that episode perform so well. So hopefully that sets the stage a little bit for you in regards to like the state of the state in regards to the show, and just kind of the guests and what performs well and what you're interested in. And even if it doesn't perform well, it doesn't mean that conversation isn't as valuable to me, because truthfully, every single one of these is, which dovetails very well into a question that was posed by Rick from Las Vegas. And I put this out on, like, people could email me, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com, or they just hit me up on social media as I asked for, mailbag episode questions. Have you ever scrapped an episode? No, straight up, I've never scrapped an episode. Even on episodes and interviews that I felt less than excited about, where I'm like, oh, they felt kind of flat, like either I didn't make the connection, and truthfully, it's usually on me. Very rarely is it a person that, doesn't want to be on here. Sometimes you have to marinate in the conversation where it's like, 20 or 30 minutes for a person to feel comfortable with the way that this conversation is going, and understanding that it's not like a typical interview where it's like, let's talk about your new record. How was the last tour? They do that in a lot of other places, but, sometimes it takes people that, time frame to kind of cool down, so to speak, and be like, oh, I'm not in press mode, even though I am. But anyway, so I've never cut an episode. There's two specific instances. There's one episode that I actually pulled down at the guest's request. That was just because they expressed things that they didn't really feel were reflective of who they are, and they shared some stuff about their past. Like, it wasn't anything that was really controversial by any stretch of the imagination, but truthfully, if anybody ever hits me up and is like, hey, I wasn't that comfortable with that, I first say, I can edit out that spot, or I can, be able to make sure that episode, it has some sort of disclaimer or whatever. But this person was like, no, I actually just feel more comfortable if you pull it down. And I'm like, no problem. So I've done that before. It's only once. And then there was one episode that truthfully, I don't know why this one haunts me is a very strong statement, but I think about this episode anytime someone asks me this question. It was, and this is not to drag the band's name or this particular person any way, shape, or form, but it was interesting. There's a band called Frameworks. They're from Florida. They were put out a few records on Death Wish. I'm fairly certain I'm not active anymore. Not really, doing anything with that. So it was the vocalist, Luke. Sweet guy. Totally had no problem with him, but a friend of mine was working his record from a publicity perspective and was like, Luke, like, this is like Luke's dream to appear on the podcast, which anytime anybody says that, obviously they are, I trust my friend. So like I completely trust her from sharing that to me. But anytime that's said, I'm just like, okay, let's make sure this is real. And this is not just like, flattery from somebody to appear on a show. And I trust her. So I was like, wow, that's really cool. Let's have the conversation. Even though Frameworks, for me personally, which this will lead into another question that I will answer, they weren't lighting me on fire. I was like, they're cool. I understand where they're coming from. Musically, I like them. But it wasn't anything that I was like, dude, I got to have someone from Frameworks coming into the show. Anyways, I do the interview. And truthfully, it was kind of like, I don't know. He just was off. Like, it felt I couldn't get him to expand on his answers. And like I said, this is mostly on me rather than on Luke. I'm never going to like point fingers at people without pointing them at myself. But it just was kind of off. And I was like, And I felt like by the end of 30, 35 minutes, which typically I go like an hour with people, I was like, I think I'm done here. And that was really one of the only first times that I did that. So anyways, I use that as an example, not to either make fun of or say that Luke was a terrible guest or whatever. It just was off. And that was really one of the first times where I was like, I had to question in my brain. I'm like, am I going to release this? I'm like, you know what? Let me send this to the publicist and we can talk about it. And we did, and I released it. And so you can be the judge. You can listen to it and be like, oh, this feels off. Of course, if you're going to listen to it now with the information that I've given you, you probably will maybe arrive at the same conclusion. Or you can just say like, Ray, you're crazy. That was totally a normal interview. So anyways, hopefully that answers did you ever scrap an episode from Rick from Vegas? And then how do you decide who to bring on? That was one of the most popular questions. Just shout out to Patrick from New York and Angie from the UK. Appreciate all of you that were curious about this because it's a process. And when I say it's a process, like there's multiple inputs. There's my own personal relationships that I have with people, considering the fact that, I've existed in this weird world for over 20 years, played in bands, worked at record labels, managed bands, do a lot of stuff that's still connected to it. And I still care about it deeply. So there's that consideration. There's also the fact that I have a lot of friends that do publicity and people who I trust in having interesting ideas for people to have conversations with. And then frankly, there's also cold pitches, people that reach out and are just like, hey, I would love to be on the show for this reason. And I would say if I'm like percentaging that out, I would say 60% of the time is people that I have direct relationships with. 30% of the time, it's people that I have direct relationships with from a publicity perspective, or I'm doing the outreach to people to have them on the show because I love them. I love the band. I'm just compelled to have them on the show. And then 10% is like cold outreach, people just reaching out to me that are like, hey, here's my band, check this out. I would equate it also to like the way that record labels work. And by no stretch of the imagination is getting signed to a record label the same as appearing on my podcast. I'm not equating the two, but that's really the way that when I was working at Century Media Records for the 10 plus years that I did, there were, very rare instances in which a demo, like completely unsolicited or cold, really perked our ears to be like, whoa, let's talk to this band. Let's see what they have going on. So, but then also how I decide who to bring on, this kind of goes back to the question that I was teasing in regards to the new band, episodes that were successful this past year from a download perspective. I truly do sometimes, like if someone is hitting me up and they're just releasing their first record and maybe it's a band that is like just getting their footing, I am very honest and transparent where I'm like, I don't think you're ready. And that's not because you can't handle the conversation or I'm like some, incredible press get or something like that. But I'm like, I don't know if we have enough to talk about right now. Like you're just getting started. Let's wait a minute. Like for me personally, like let the record sit with me a little bit longer. And truthfully, that is meant to be because I don't like to have people on for more than one episode. I really want to make sure that this episode that I do with a person is encapsulating of who they are up to that particular point. And so sometimes I feel where it's like, if you're 20 years old and you're just releasing your first record, you really don't have a ton to talk about besides like, how you got into punk or hardcore and all that sort of stuff. And like the life experience I feel is very important to what it is I'm trying to capture here in these interviews. And so it doesn't mean to say that if like you're really young that you can't appear on this show. There's clearly so many exceptions to that rule. I'm thinking of one where I was like, I had Jamie from Code Orange. I think it was on like my 5th or 6th episode or something. And I think he was legitimately like 16 years old. I mean, so young, but anyways, so that's another factor where there's sometimes I'm like, okay, maybe if we wait a little bit, it's going to help both of our cases, so to speak, where if I have you on, you're, more popular. So there's going to be more people that are interested in hearing your story. Because sometimes I don't want to do an injustice for a band releasing an episode and kind of no one really cares. Or maybe retrospectively, like 2 years later, they'll be like, oh, wow, that person appeared on the show. I'm going to go back and listen to that episode. So many different considerations, but ultimately that's kind of a little sneak peek of how I personally choose. In truth, like I don't have a booker. This is literally just me. I edit, I produce, I do everything in regards to the show. So there isn't anybody else that's touching this. So let's talk about the next question, which is how or why do you cover so many different genres? This came in from Jamie from Texas. And this question hits kind of at the soul of, I guess, who I am as a person and then also like my own musical interests. I feel that through the lens that I've viewed independent music, I've always been a very eclectic music listener in regards to, I don't necessarily care if it falls under one genre, as long as it is of the independent music caliber, I'm going to be interested in it. And I'll give you an example. Like, I know once I first started to go to shows, like, of course, once you get into like punk and hardcore, like that's really all you're focused on. My aperture opened up pretty quickly, whether that was just me being an only child and listening to a ton of different genres within that umbrella and being attracted to certain things based on zines I was reading or based on bands' thank you lists, all that sort of stuff. The typical ways of us, whatever, Gen X, Gen Y people of how, they existed pre-internet to find out about music. But I started to quickly be like, I can go to a Get Up Kid show and I can also go to a Madball show within the same week at the same venue. And I'm totally fine with that. Whereas there definitely was a lot of lines in which like, oh, dude, if you're at a floor punch show, like you can't go to a dystopia show. And when I say you can't, like no one was telling you couldn't do that. But sometimes people just were really sticking to their lane, so to speak. And I'm not saying that my way was better than anybody else's way, but I say all that to kind of paint the picture of I want people to listen to genres that they might not typically listen to, as long as it's under the banner of being like, hey, this person came from the same scene as you. Maybe they're creating entirely different art than what you are into. Maybe you are into like the, typo negative ripoff bands that exist here in, the 20s, I guess we'll call it. But then you don't listen to something like a, Midwestern emo band or whatever. The musical connective tissue that exists between those scenes is very real. And I think that is an important factor in highlighting a wide variety of bands and artists. Because like I said, one of the prevailing themes of me as a person is having a pretty wide aperture for the style of music that I'm listening to, as long as it has that sort of core component to it. And I don't mean core as in hardcore. So that's why I feel very comfortable painting with a very broad brush, having, someone who you might not think be connected to this scene at all, but then is like, oh no, I was raised within this punk and hardcore scene and this is what I've done now. Like, I'll give you a little teaser. An episode that I have coming up early next year is a person who is a writer for GQ. He also played in the band The Ghost Inside, wrote a book on streetwear. People might not typically look at him and be like, oh yeah, like he's connected to the scene, but he is. And he's created great art and he's done great writing in regards to that art. So anyways, that is why I have such a wide variety of genres. And I'm not just sticking to where it's like, here is the punk podcast or here is the hardcore podcast. I truthfully just want to paint with that independent music brush. That is the lens that I'm viewing all this through. So hopefully that shares a little bit insight in regards to that. What is something about the podcast you thought you understood when you started, but you totally didn't? This was a very, very cool question from Bruce from Michigan. And honestly, like it made me pause where I was like, oh my gosh, this is a really deep question. I think for me personally, what I thought I knew about the way that people express themselves was, sort of soundbitey, or you had to have some sort of hook or conceit for the conversation to be like, okay, the reason I'm having this person on is because they went through this thing on the internet, or they released this record that, is critically acclaimed or whatever. Like, you need to have a hook. What I realized is that some of my not only most popular episodes, but most insightful conversations were people that like literally had nothing to promote. And that was really, really cool. Like, one of my favorite things to do is kind of like spelunking for guests, where it's like, here's a band that was important to me and is important to a lot of people. Like, I'll pick two of my more recent conversations that I've had. Speaking to Scott from Bloodlet and Brett from Torn Apart were really important to me. Not only because both of those bands were like building blocks for me getting into the more metallic side of hardcore and like really branching my brain out for especially a band like Bloodlet, where it's like, dude, this is challenging music for a 16 and 17-year-old. But I had to dig for those people and like, literally like DM their band's page, because Scott plays in a band called Hollow Leg. And so it was very funny because, for using Scott as an example, his bandmates were like, oh, you should totally do this. Like, you can obviously talk about Hollow Leg, but like people want to know about Bloodlet. I want to know about Bloodlet, me personally. And finally, after, honestly, it was a better part of like year and a half, 2 years. I went through different ways to connect with him and the band. And then finally it all came together, and nothing makes me happier. So truthfully, like I said, it's people that don't have anything to promote. It's very, very interesting to hear how they're viewing not only their art, their music, either in retrospect or in the fact that they're in a lull in a creative moment. And it's exciting. So that's probably something about the podcast that I thought I understood when I started, but then I totally did not. It is indeed a happy new year when you are shopping with our friends at evilgreed.com. So you go to that website first and foremost, use the promo code best of. It gets you 10% off of your very first order, and it is an amazing purveyor of heavy music, merchandise, and records. I don't care if you're into like super brutal death metal or if you are into, cool indie rock. It's all of the milieu that you are undoubtedly listening to this show for. You like all of that independent stuff, and that is where Evil Greed is just your one-stop shop to be able to get all of this cool stuff, whether it's exclusive colors of vinyl, long sleeves, sweatshirts, whatever it is, they got it. But they have a specific point of view. They're not just opening the doors to any, Tom, Dick, and Harry label. They're working with cool stuff that you undoubtedly are either a fan of already or will be a fan of in like a year. So go to evilgreed.com, use the promo code BESTOF. That is specific for the show. It gets you 10% off your entire order. And go shopping. They're based in Berlin, Germany, but they ship worldwide, and the shipping rates to us here in the States are very advantageous. So hop on it, use the promo code BESTOF for 10% off for a limited time. It runs out after like a month or so. So please use that code. That way they know this show sent you. Go to evilgreed.com now. Just because the holidays are like here and upon you does not mean that you can't go shopping with all of that great Christmas money that's coming in. Whether it's, something that your grandma gave you, turn in that savings bond. No, wait, no one gives saving bonds anymore. But our friends at rockabilia.com are the place where you can go to buy all of your favorite band merchandise, whether it's punk, hardcore, metal, mainstream hip hop, whatever it is, they got it. And the promo code is 100 words or less. Gets you 10% off your order. They ship from the Midwest here in the United States of America, and it gets to you very quickly. And if you run into any problems, customer service is right there. They nail it. Such a cool company. And you can get all of this stuff, whether you're into the Beatles or whether you're into The Offspring or Green Day or, Metallica or Gojira, whatever it is, they got it. And the important part is it's officially licensed. That means the bands get paid. You end up supporting them. You get cool merch. You're supporting an independent business. It is a virtuous circle that everybody wins in every aspect of it, except maybe your pocketbook, because you're like, dang it, maybe I shouldn't have bought like the 17th shirt on here. But that's neither here nor there. That's between you and your pocketbook. Go to rockabilia.com, use the promo code 100 words or less, and have fun shopping. A few last questions, and then we'll tie this in a bow and you can open it for Christmas. It was a question I got. Is there an episode that changed how you approach interviews or conversations in general? This was asked by a few different people, but specifically Scott in Australia. I don't know exactly where. I'll just give you a shout out because it's international and obviously sounds cool. There's an interview that sticks out that someone actually just recently echoed back to me that they listened to and really, really enjoyed. I had Davey Havoc from AFI. This was, probably 8 years or so ago. And by that time, I had known him for a bit through different work channels, and we just existed in the same universe. And Davey has always been, talk about a total mensch of a human being. So great, so insightful. When you are spending time with him, truly you do feel like, oh, you're locked in. You want to have this conversation, and it's great. So when I went over to Davey's house, he was living in a sort of unconventional situation at that particular time, where he was living in the Hollywood Hills with a person who, had a very luxurious, not a mansion, but a very nice house. And then Davey was living in it wasn't exactly an ADU, additional dwelling unit, I think that's what they call it. But it was, it was still attached to the home, but it was kind of off to the side. But anyways, it was kind of like a little sort of treehouse in a way. And I think that was because of just being located in the Hollywood Hills. It just felt like you're on top of everything. Anyways, I set the stage because Davey, we talked for probably an hour and a half, and we could have probably gone on for another 2 hours or so. But the reason that episode sticks out to me is just because it felt so free, not only for me, but for him as a person as well, because he was able to express kind of the breadth of who he was as a human. We were talking a lot about the book that he had just recently released at that particular time, but just hearing how he viewed creativity in general. Because I think a lot of people, especially in our broad independent music scene, especially when you're talking about punk and hardcore, sometimes people are just like, oh, I just want to be in a youth crew band, or I want to be in a straight edge band or whatever. And you're not really viewing it as a creative outlet. Yes, you are under the circumstance of why you're trying to create the art. But in hearing the way that Davey was expressing himself, and it kind of unlocked something in me where I was like, this is truthfully the sort of conversation I want to have with everybody, where it's they're viewing what they're doing on a prism. They're not just going to be this person I'm speaking to for this particular band or project. They're going to continue to evolve, not only musically, but maybe creatively. They're going to pursue other things, and it's all going to be exciting. So anyways, that was an episode that changed how I approached interviews, because it really I was very prepared going into that one just because it was earlier-ish in the podcast career from this show's perspective. But it just really showed me the fact that I could focus on a person's creative output and be able to give them the space to express themselves in a unique way that only podcasting can really provide. Like, yes, there is a video component of this, which I'll save for another episode at some point. But when you are just talking to a person in a room with microphones, there's something that's so incredibly intimate about that. And I just felt that episode really hit that feeling. And that's been something that I've been chasing ever since then. I can't remember what episode debut was. Like, honestly, it was prior to, 100 episodes. It was probably like 40, 50. I can't remember exactly, but shout out to that episode. And then I'm going to end it with a very simple question, but something that, I feel like when people tell what it is that they do for work is so interesting and engaging, because you can look at anybody who's appeared on this podcast and be like, oh, yes, like, they probably like live off their band or whatever. I mean, not everybody thinks the way that I do, but I remember so many times when especially when I started to attend like punk and hardcore shows. Like, I'll give you an example. Adamantium was a Southern California hardcore band, really, really important for me and many others in the scene. But as Taken started to play shows, they were a really important band. It was like a local metalcore band that I just like immediately attached myself to. Anyways, Aaron Stone, the vocalist, worked at a local Trader Joe's, and I ran into him as he was working there. And it really unlocked something in my brain where I was like, oh yeah, like we're so many different people to so many in so many different circumstances. And not saying that Aaron was a person that was like only defined by him being in a band, but it just made me think of we are all existing in all of these different spaces, and it's exciting to hear that. So anyways, more than one person asked me like, what do you do for work? And shout out to James from Washington, Mitchell from Florida, and Whitney from Florida. All like of the 6 or 7 people that asked that question, those were the names that I wrote down. But I'll break it down into a few chunks. My normal day job, when I put normal, that's in big air quotes, but I work for a podcast company. Technically I work for Amazon, but I work for Amazon's podcast company called Wondery. I do ad sales. And what that means is I talk to a lot of agencies and clients and anybody who's interested in podcast advertising. I talk to them about whatever they're curious about. Where it's like, how do the ads work? Like, how does one figure out if a host wants to read for a particular brand? All of these nuances. Truthfully, I fell into this because of this very podcast, because I was doing this show for so long. I got brought into a network and I got to know some people over there. And then that blossomed into the, 10-year career that I've had in ad sales for that side of things. So that is my day job. I spend most of my week doing that. But then because it's connected to podcasting, obviously, me as a podcaster, as a content creator myself, I'm able to speak very authentically towards that whole experience, because obviously I read ads. I'm part of the ecosystem, as it were. So it kind of adds an additional layer of like, oh, I'm not just like a salesperson. Like, I'm literally, game recognizes game, or whatever it is people say. But yeah, so obviously I do the podcast as well. I also manage bands and producers as well. I work with a company called Tandem Management. I manage 3 bands as of right now. I manage a band called Seosin. I manage a band called Roman Candle, and I manage a band called Wakely. I love doing that. It was something I really was resistant to for many, many years, just because I was like, I don't want to deal with drama or the idea of a band breaking down in Florida and being like, Ray, what do we do? I'm like, I'm 3,000 miles away from you. I can't help you right now. I can call you AAA. That's the best that I could do. But fortunately, all of the people that I work with are incredibly resourceful, and I am just basically a person that is meant to execute their vision, and hopefully being able to use some of my music industry experience to help walk them through all of those different challenges that exist out there. So, and then the 2 producers I manage the guitarist of Seosin, and then I manage another guy named Sam who lives in LA that is a producer, and he's done a ton of great work, which is, it's really fun for me to dabble in all of those things. So yeah, that's what I do for work, and that's how I make money. And I love this podcast, and I love you for listening to this thing for as long as you have. So shout out to everyone, and please be safe, everybody.
Did you know you can opt out of winter? With Vrbo, save up to $1,500 for booking a month-long stay. When thousands of sunny homes are waiting for you, why subject yourself to the cold? Put the snow shovel down, put the parka back in the closet, and don't you dare scrape another windshield. Slip into some flip-flops, consider a sunless tan, and use the monthly stays filter to save up to $1,500. Book your warm getaway at Vrbo.com.